Hello, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I'm doing okay, thank you. I'm doing okay. So I'll lead us into this episode because
Yeah.
it is a bit of a personal one, guys, and I have teetered on the edge for probably a week or a couple of weeks of whether to share this or not. And I did share it on my social media on Monday, I think it was. And it became evident that it is a conversation that maybe needs to be had and needs to be shared that little bit more. So, the very reasons that were almost stopping me sharing, I have identified are the very reasons that I should share. And I have basically been through a miscarriage very recently. And we had just done our retreat, hadn't we? Which
Yeah.
was incredible. I was on cloud nine, as were you, and so was Sam. We had the most amazing day, and I had a little summer secret that I thought we were expecting baby number three. And on the Monday, I was going home kind of twice as excited because I had my 12-week scan. And getting to that scan, I was excited, had a few nerves like you do. Um, but sitting down on that bed, and when they first put that cold
Mm,
cold stuff on your tummy,
mm,
um, it felt a little bit different. And I don't know why. I felt a little bit different, and nothing came up on that screen. And it was just a black screen and just silence. And obviously, I get why they're silent, but it was scary because you're like, why are they not saying anything? And neither was Dale, really, neither was I in those moments. And it was thought that I possibly had a miscarriage, and but they couldn't be certain. So it was been a few weeks of a lot of waiting because they have to wait a week to make sure that there hasn't been any growth. Um, but in those moments after finding that out, I had to have an internal exam, so many more things that you don't expect, from that situation that can be and feel quite a lot, and I was in the room. They put you in a little side room. And one of the first things Dale said to me was, don't blame yourself. What did I do? I blamed myself. And I instantly went to, it's my fault. Like, my body's failed. And I held such a resentment towards my body because I'd not known. And this had possibly happened around about 6 weeks, we thought by then, by the size and stuff. And my body had continued on thinking it was pregnant. And I couldn't believe that it couldn't know and that there wasn't any symptoms and there weren't any signs. And I felt really stupid for having shared that with anyone, that I was pregnant and I wasn't. And oh yeah, that was a lot. So we basically went out the back exit, which I've never experienced before. And I get why they do it, but it is a weird old time. I don't think there's a right or the wrong, wrong way for them to deal with that. Got a free parking thing, so we don't have to pay for parking. And we went out of that back door, and I just felt so just awful, and so like a failure. And I went home and I wanted to shut myself away and just close the doors, close everything in. And I did, and I needed that. But about an hour after, I said to Dad, I just need to sit on the sofa. He actually really encouraged me to go and tell my mum and dad because I hadn't told them that I was even pregnant at this point. And I was scared to tell them. Don't know why. Um, but to then have that double whammy of telling them that I was pregnant and I possibly wasn't anymore was a lot. But I did go and kind of Dale really did push me into that, but I really needed that because I could have so easily hidden away and not spoken to anybody and stayed in that I'm a failure and being so harsh to myself. So I want to share this for that reason of how I have over this past few years built up such an amazing self-awareness within. Like I catch myself a lot if I'm being unkind to myself, or if I'm, telling myself I can't do something when I know that I can. And in those moments, I didn't spot it straight away, but I did start to spot it probably towards the end of that day. And that was powerful. And, I'm not saying that made this time any easier. But what did happen through that awareness of knowing just how much I was blaming myself was I kind of went through those questions of what is the truth here? Has my body failed? And I started to look into how this happens, why this happens, reading other people's stories. And it wasn't my fault. My body hadn't failed. And I read something that said, I should have had this up, but it was basically that in not speaking, how much shame can breed in that space, and how shame then feeds into loneliness. And in that moment, I gave myself a hug. And I shared this to you before because I actually did give myself a hug, and it was such a moment of deep, deep self-compassion for me, because I felt sorry for my body for not having known, and that was such an incredible shift to have, that without that awareness, I wouldn't have had at all. Like, I would have continued on the story of I'm a failure and my body's a failure. But in giving myself a hug, I realized that it wasn't my fault and I hadn't failed. And that self-compassion, I still had, obviously, rode the waves of sadness and needing slow days and needing days to just do nothing. But then equally, I kind of had days where, you kind of want to do things and get back to normal. So I still experienced those waves, but those waves weren't as fierce with self-compassion, because I had my own back and I had my body's back. And it allowed me to kind of feel that sadness, but also move through into gratitude a little bit quicker and just be grateful for having had that summer with that little baby that I won't get to meet. But I can genuinely sit here and say that I'm grateful that I had that chance. And obviously I wish things were different, and I wish, that they were still all right inside growing today. But life will always have its challenges, and this was one of those challenges. And it really, really showed me how much what we do in terms of building self-awareness, building that self-compassion, becoming our own coaches, becoming our own best friends, becoming that person that we can turn to and support, feel that support. It really helps. And I kind of look back on this and think, if I'd have experienced it a few years ago without the awareness, what that would have looked like. And that makes me sad, because I could have continued on that path of being really quite harsh to myself, and that would have fed into quite a lot, going forward. So, compassion.
You chose to take care of yourself.
Yeah. And the interesting thing was, the first thing that Dale said to me was, don't blame yourself. And people can say these things. We could sit here, and to anyone who's listening who may be going through a hard time or going through something similar, we can sit and say, don't blame yourself. But until you take that with it, like I had to not blame myself. And I realized that this is a very unique and personal journey. But self-compassion is where it's at. And I think the world needs a lot more of it.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
No worries.
Thank you. And I think it's important to have conversations like this, isn't it? Because I can only imagine how alone in that moment you would have felt. And I know you've kind of expressed that as well. And it's important to have these conversations and that strength within to move from it's my fault, my body's failed me, to hold on a minute, it hasn't, it's not my fault. And to physically give yourself a hug. Wow. Like just big wows.
Yeah.
Big wows, because like you've reflected, it's the journey you've been on the past few years that's allowed you to do that, because you're equipped and you're tooled up, and you kind of know how to look after yourself. And you know when you need that self-compassion, you're not afraid to give it to yourself.
No.
And what a wonderful gift to be able to give to yourself in a challenging time like that. And like we always share, we don't wear rose-tinted glasses. Like
no.
What is it? Unicorns and rainbows and all sorts of things. It's not all that, is it? And
don't get me wrong, I had that moment where I was like, for goodness sake, not another thing. Like, come on. Like, and I'm not being funny, guys. I'll be completely honest in this right now, right? I work very hard with all that we do, don't I? As do you. And it's a journey. And, you know, the journey to building a business, you have to be relentless. The journey to being the change that you wish to see in the world is a relentless journey, and it takes a lot of taking personal responsibility. And I think when this happened, it was another thing of like, come on, I thought this beautiful summer surprise was like, and I was just it was a surprise, and you know, a beautiful one, and I didn't know that was going to be our path, but I was so excited. And you just think, oh, it's been taken away. And we can very quickly then throw in the towel and say, well, thanks, life. Another thing. What's the point? Oh, let's go back to that one.
That one. And that's why I reflect on the strength within and the resilience. And that's not to say you just, okay. Because I hope it's okay to share this. We had a chat and you were like, moving through the challenge, you possibly did it faster than you thought you could. You could. Is that okay to does that make sense? And I think it's not to say that what happened didn't happen. It's you know, when we just stay in a place for a period of time, I think with doing the inner work the way we do, the self-development, the personal growth, it's this equipping yourself to move through the challenges at just a different pace. And that doesn't mean don't feel, squash the emotions. Absolutely not at all. It is feel it all and know that that's okay. And then it's just within our abilities to kind of get back to that kind of more compassionate self-talk.
I think what you've just then feel it all, because historically what I probably would have done is felt part of it and then run away, felt part of it and run away. And what I did do in those moments that followed finding out, and, you know, in kind of that awful limbo phase, was really allow myself to feel it and feel that sadness, because it was incredibly sad. And of course I didn't want that to happen. Like, and I felt all the feelings in those moments, but the important thing was, you know, you hear that a lot, don't you? Feel your feelings. Oh, for goodness sake. But actually, if we let ourselves, and, you know, I sat on the sofa and watched absolute nonsense for a couple of days, but I was all there. And I wouldn't have done that before. So it was kind of that I didn't run away. So it was almost, I suppose, hard. No, I don't know. It's not really, harder or not hard, because it was hard in those moments. But what I mean is I did feel everything, but I allowed myself to without the running away, which I
Yeah.
would have done previously. And then that
Yeah.
kind of, like you say, kind of elongates that really painful time. And
Mm.
we're always going to go through this at our own pace, and not one, two people are the same at all.
No, not at all. No.
But when I look at my journey of how I would have dealt with this without the self-awareness and self-compassion, I would have run away.
Mm.
And in running away, those feelings would have got more and more a grip on me. Like that failure, that it's my fault. I
Mm.
would have stuck these labels on me, and they would have ingrained themselves on me, and it would have
Mm.
been much harder to remove them. Whereas in noticing that it's my fault label, that I'm a failure label, stuck it on, like, for the moments that pass
Mm.
and when I needed to feel that. But then I did something, and I was able to take that off and just go, absolutely not. That's not me.
Yeah.
um, and that was empowering, because I also found the evidence that it wasn't my fault. And sometimes I think without that, we can just think that our thoughts are 100% the truth.
Mm.
And, when it's our thought, that's reality.
Yeah.
But I'd love to know how many of our thoughts are not reality, because I bet that number is pretty high.
Oh,
I
with
don't
the
know.
amount that we have a day, probably a lot are not
Yes.
true.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think I remember, like, I think it was perhaps the first time we spoke on maybe a Zoom or something, um, following, and I just could sense something. And I think I said to you, without you saying anything, you do know it's not your fault, don't you? I
Yes.
could, you just, because it's almost like
Mm.
our go-to, isn't it?
It is. And
And I
that
just,
that's so sad to me. And I think that I found that extra sad, that that's what we go
mm,
to,
mm,
that's our natural
mm.
thought after something like that can happen. That's not
And I,
right.
no, and I think an easy way to kind of think about self-compassion in terms of how to give it to yourself, how to start practicing it, if it was you see yourself as the friend. So if I'd have
Yeah.
come to you and said
Mhm.
that I had been through that,
Yeah.
would you turn to me and tell me it was my fault and that my body had failed me?
No,
You wouldn't.
no. And that really puts it into perspective, doesn't it?
Mm,
Of
mm,
just these assumptions that we can make, and that blame that we can so
yeah.
quickly just drop on
Mm,
ourselves.
mm,
Yeah, gosh. And I kind of, going through that, it was like I say, we don't wear rose tinted glasses, and it wasn't easy. And I have had, that mixture of emotions. And then, you know, everyone's, story is different with this, but it was, for me personally, it was a lot of waiting.
mm,
And I think it was over the space of 3 weeks. I think it was about 3 weeks, that ended in me um blacking out and having to go to hospital and having a
mm,
procedure done that was horrible. It was a
mm,
lot. It was a lot. um but then, I don't know, moving through that, like you say, well, obviously was in hospital on the Thursday, and we had a family wedding on this Saturday in Croatia. And my daughters were flower girls,
mm,
and I remember I spoke to the nurses, and I was like, like I want to go.
mm,
I feel like I should go. I feel like I'm ready to go. And obviously that was, kind of, they advised me on what they could advise me on in terms of, like, my health and stuff. Um, but I did go, and it was actually the perfect way to just get away for a few days and come back. And it did hit me again when I came back, because that was just a little stint of running away, really, wasn't it?
mm,
Putting yourself in
mm.
a different place. But it was needed. And then, yeah, it's just this roller coaster. So I think we all navigate it differently. And it's about what I wanted to share actually was the tool that I've used over this past few years. And I started out where I had to journal it because I wouldn't just ask myself these two questions naturally. And I think we've shared them before on the podcast, but I always used to journal most mornings and just ask myself how I was and what do I need from me today? Simply those two questions. And through that time, I continue to ask myself that. And because I have journaled and journaled and journaled about those two questions, it comes very naturally to me now. So I don't actually need to write it down. And it's just a thought that I have every morning, most of the time when I'm having my coffee. And I honored that need to go.
Yeah.
And then equally, when I got back, I honored that need to slow down again a little bit. And, it was just that kind of, first of all, finding out how we're feeling and what those needs are is really important. And I think I'd gone so far away from that previously. Like I wouldn't have a clue really how I was, and and we ask each other, "Oh, I'm fine."
Fine.
We've got very good at saying
fine.
I'm fine. Yes, I'm fine. Oh, if we're saying I'm fine, we need to look a little deeper.
Yeah. 100%.
And I remember when I used to start journaling, I'd say, so I'd ask the question, "How are you, Charlotte?" Literally write that out. Then I'd be like, "I'm fine, thank you, Charlotte. How are you?" So that's how I'd always reply. I'd always deflect.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to come back to it. I'd write that out. But how are you really?
Yeah.
And then I could start getting into that. But I needed those first few words and that little bit of like ping ponging just to get myself going on the page.
It's lovely the conversations you can have with yourself on the page, because I do the same, and I put how am I, and then I reply with I'm fine, thank you, and then I put, well, we both know what that means, don't we?
Well, what's going
Clearly
on?
not okay.
Oh gosh. But yeah, that moment doing that with your coffee in the morning, habit stack, do it with something you're already doing. Like, and I know that life is busy, right? And we can realistically, self-compassion is going to come pretty low down on your list of priorities if you've not practiced this very much. It really is. But I promise you that when you start putting it further up on your to-do list and you habit stack it with something you're already doing, and you just start asking yourself a few questions, start building that self-understanding, that just start figuring out what those wants and needs are again. That connection back to yourself is so beautiful. And I don't think until experiencing this, I realized quite how I do have my own back. And it's been a really beautiful thing to see. And I am the person that I can turn to. And that is so beautiful to me, because that was worlds away from a few years ago. Like I was my own worst enemy.
And now your own best friend, it's something to be so, so proud of.
Yeah.
And maneuvering it from the bottom of the list, like, and moving it in terms of priorities up almost to the top. We look after ourselves, we understand ourselves. We start to have a great relationship with ourselves. And we love ourselves unconditionally. It's just that's really where the magic lies, and life just changes a lot, doesn't it?
It does. It really, really does. And that's not to be without hard times, but it's you navigate them differently, and you see the beauty in things that you'll be like, there's no beauty there. There is. That hug I gave myself in that moment was beautiful, and it was a moment I will never forget. And
Thank you.
No worries at all. I also just thought I'd add on to this episode that obviously, this is a personal thing. And if anyone did ever want to reach out to me, we all go through this very, very differently. But we are always here for you guys. And just know that our DMs, our messages, our emails, hello@theauthenticgirlsclub.com, are always open. And we're just here for you, and we believe in you. And I hope that you take away a big chunk of compassion from this episode and just give it to yourself, even if you may seem silly, but give yourself a hug. Feels kind of good. I won't lie.
Yeah.
Feels
Yeah.
good when you just have that moment and go, do you know what? I'm doing all right. I really, really am. So yeah, lots of love, guys. Big, big love. And we will speak to you very soon.
Take care. Speak soon.
Bye,
Bye.
guys. Bye.